Hello! I don't have, statistically this up, but I expect the most common reason for Christian apologists to talk about illusionism in the philosophy of mind is to argue against it and say, hey, we need to believe in immaterial stuff to account for consciousness. Eventually, this posit is used in an argument for God's existence. But today, I'm not doing that. I thought it would be fun to create a theodicy based on illusionism. Let's jump into things. One of the most famous puzzles in philosophy is the hard problem of consciousness. How do physical brains give rise to phenomenal consciousness? If someone looks at a red apple, I can describe all the physical facts going on. I can describe the properties of the apple, how the eye works, how the brain works, and so on. But even after you describe all these physical facts, there is still something missing. What does it feel like to see the color red? A blind man can know and understand all those physical facts without knowing what the phenomenal state of seeing red is like. Philosophers are rather interested about the nature of these phenomenal states. What are they? Where do they come from? One strategy for dealing with this problem is simply denying that there are phenomenal states. Consciousness, as we normally think of it, doesn't exist. Illusionists, in particular, say that our brains are lying to us. Our brains tell us we are conscious, that there is something that it is like to see the color red, even though it doesn't actually exist. Here's an analogy to hopefully clarify. Research shows that the brain manipulates the data you get from your eyes. For example, when you move your eyes to look at something, the eyes are temporarily moving super fast. For this short moment of time, everything is super blurry. So your brain just ignores this moment, and you don't see anything. Your brain just does this saccadic masking automatically. Over the course of the day, your brain just deletes dozens of minutes of visual data, milliseconds at a time, without telling you. Now, illusionists think that your brain is similarly deceptive when you perform introspection. But instead of deleting data that your eyes get, your brain is just completely making stuff up. How are you feeling right now? Think about it. Are you happy, hungry, in pain? Right now, you're analyzing what's going on inside of you. There's some action you are performing right now that involves gathering information about stuff going on inside your head. This is introspection. Illusionists say that while you gather this information, your brain is feeding you lies. One of these lies is that you have phenomenal consciousness. The various properties that you attribute to your own mind, like my consciousness can't be described in the language of physics, is just an illusion. Your brain isn't any more supernatural than a sophisticated computer that has some false assumptions embedded in its representation of reality. So that's the solution to the hard problem of consciousness. When philosophers ask, where does the phenomenal state of seeing red come from? The answer is, the phenomenal state of seeing red doesn't exist. We just think it exists. I want to note that different illusionists might characterize their views a bit differently than this, but this is the basic idea. Consciousness is an illusion created by the brain. One objection to illusionism is that it has some really weird ethical implications. If someone is experiencing excruciating pain, it seems you have a moral obligation to help in any way you can. But if their pain is just an illusion, then so is this obligation. If a moral obligation is grounded in what someone feels, it just vanishes in a puff of smoke. This is a pretty popular objection to illusionism, and illusionists try to offer an account of how we could have moral obligations without phenomenal consciousness. But I think there's a different route you can go. The destruction of moral obligations isn't a bug, it's a feature. If illusionism is correct, and there is no pain, no suffering, then this massively undercuts the problem of evil. Why doesn't God do something about the suffering in the world? Because there just isn't any suffering in the world to stop. Theists already have a bunch of theodicies to explain why God would allow the existence of a suffering-filled world. For example, giving humans free will results in moral evil and suffering. Or suffering can help us cultivate virtue and promote soul building, and so on. But if illusionism is true, God can get all that stuff without anybody actually suffering. So that's the phenomenal illusionism theodicy, God exists and illusionism is true. We can go on to posit that when we get to heaven, God gives us true phenomenal consciousness instead of just an illusion. Even if brains can't give us true consciousness, God sure can. He is omnipotent. On this view, God ingeniously ensures he gets everything he wants while never actually letting anyone suffer. Now, I don't think that this theodicy single-handedly solves the problem of evil, since some evils aren't related to suffering or conscious experience at all. Maybe you think that being deceived by an illusion is itself an evil. Still, a theodicy that completely explains all apparent suffering is pretty good if you ask me. Unfortunately, I can't bring myself to actually endorse it. I think illusionism is implausible. But I do find this theodicy to be absolutely hilarious. The motivation behind illusionism is a bunch of naturalists saying, hey, we are serious science people, and we believe serious sciencey things. Phenomenal consciousness is basically just magic, and illusionism allows us to do away with the non-physical from our understanding of the world. But my response is, what an intriguing theory. I'm going to use it for theology. Anyways, that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Remember, Christ died for our sins and rose again. Goodbye.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for checking out this channel. And thanks especially for checking out this video. This is a video that I've been working on for a long time, but I'm really excited to share with all of you. So in this video, I'm going to be presenting facts about Jesus, about first century Judea, and about the birth of Christianity. I think taken together, these facts cumulatively point in a direction that's at least compelling and I think somewhat interesting. Now, you may have already heard of the minimal facts argument. This is an argument from Gary Habermas, who's an apologist arguing for the resurrection. On the other hand, you may also be familiar with the minimal witnesses argument, which is the contrasting position by Paulo G, who's an atheist and a really prominent YouTuber. And by the way, I made a video about Paulo G's minimal witnesses argument, and I'm going to post a link to that right now. Now, both of these arguments have their strengths, but a lot of the arguments for and against the resurrection, I think, zoom in too much on that event specifically. So this constellation of arguments considers a slightly broader context, encompassing other events around the history that we know about Jesus and the birth of Christianity. All right, so a quick obligatory plug for the channel. All right, this video did take a lot of work. I hope that you'll all consider clicking the like button, especially if you get something out of this video. Please subscribe to our channel. That does really help us out a lot. Please click the notification button so that you don't miss out on future videos. And most importantly to me, I would really appreciate to get comments on this video. If there are gaps or flaws or things that you think I've overlooked, I'd really love to know that. All right, as an additional preface, there are some apologetical arguments that seem to me to be very well worn that I didn't want to recap or include in this video. But they've been spelled out elsewhere and they've been argued for by other apologists. And by the way, also, just for fun, I decided to fact check each of these arguments that I'm including in this video. I fact checked them myself through Google AI. So I basically asked Gemini AI to score each of these arguments on a scale of 1 to 10 on the degree to which it was factually truthful. And I'm going to go ahead and report those scores. Also, I would really love it if you all would fact check me on this. I especially want to know if there's anything that I've overlooked or anything I'm mistaken on. If there's any arguments that you think I should have included, please let me know that. All right, so here are 10 facts about Jesus and the birth of Christianity that I think cumulatively point in an intriguing direction. All right, fact number 1, Jesus taught a moral system that was unique, radical, and lofty, yet internally consistent and fully developed. And this alone is quite impressive. All right, so Jesus was probably at least centuries ahead of his time. Developments in morality are actually really few and far between in history, and most moral rules are, a lot of them at least, are merely restatements of the golden rule. As I mentioned in the past, even bonobos have an understanding of the golden rule, so we don't often find refinements in moral arguments throughout history. So this alone is pretty unusual. And by the way, Google Gemini gave this argument a score of 8 out of 10. Also, as philosophies advance, they often do so in communities and in an incremental fashion among several thinkers. So this also makes Jesus unusual at the very least. He came together with a moral philosophy that was kind of completely baked together and it was cohesive. And in a time of militaristic occupation, Jesus advocated for turning the other cheek. In a circle of enemies, Jesus advocated for radical forgiveness. In a time of scarcity, Jesus rejected material wealth. In a time of adversity, Jesus advocating serving those who are under-resourced. And lastly, in a culture of rigorous legalism, Jesus was a distiller of central moral values. So this has earned Jesus throughout history a lot of respect from some of the greatest thinkers in history. Here's a quote from Albert Einstein that I really like. I am a Jew, but I am enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene. Jesus is too colossal for the pen of phrasemongers, however artful. No man can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life. Here's a quote from Thomas Jefferson, also expressing a very moralistic high degree of admiration. I hold the precepts of Jesus as delivered by himself to be the most pure, benevolent, and sublime which have ever been preached to man. And here's a quote from Gandhi. Gandhi was obviously not Christian, but expressed a lot of admiration for Jesus and specifically the Sermon on the Mount. The sermon, here's the quote, "The Sermon on the Mount went straight to my heart. If I had to face only the Sermon on the Mount and my own interpretation of it, I should not hesitate to say, oh yes, I am a Christian." All right, so this fact distilled down basically is the fact that Jesus had a really insightful moral philosophy that still engenders a lot of admiration to this day, and that alone is an impressive accomplishment. All right, here's fact number 2. There is a remarkably large number of secondary sources around Jesus compared with the founders of other religions. Those sources show up very early in history after the advent of Christianity or proto-Christianity, and they rapidly grow in number. I count about 14 different surviving writings outside of the New Testament in the first 120 years of Christianity, encompassing the apostolic age and the sub-apostolic age together. Now, Google Fact Check AI gave this a score of 9 out of 10. Now, I'll put all their names on the screen, but here are some of the authors who wrote about Jesus in the first 120 years of after the advent of the death of Jesus and the advent of sort of early Christianity. Now, of these, here's the list of 6 that really, in a very direct and explicit way, affirm Jesus' miracles or supernatural works. Now, this is very unusual if we look at how many sources originated in Hinduism that also advocated for the veracity of the miracles that are part of the original mythology. We only have 3 to 4 sources. For Buddhism, similarly, we only have 3 to 4. For Shintoism, which was a major religion for a long time, we only have 2 to 3. For Baha'i, surprisingly, even though Baha'i is a very late tradition, we only have 3 to 4 sources. For Sikhism, we only have 5 sources, and this is about 15 centuries later than the advent of Christianity. Now, for Mormonism, we have a very high number at 14, but this includes all of the Mormon church leaders, and this is essentially tied. But this is 18 centuries later, where we would expect to see a lot of preserved writings. Now, we also have 6 to 8 sources for the Islamic religion in terms of early advocates outside of the Quran itself. But the Islamic religion was about 6 centuries after the birth of Christianity. So there was actually a significant increase in literacy rate in this time frame. It was essentially 10 or 20 times higher. Now, let me just recap this point by saying that we do have a lot of people who come out very early on, again, compared to other religions very early on, and endorse the narrative that is a theological narrative about what happened around the life and the death of Jesus. All right, fact number 3. The resurrection was attested in early creedal form, suggesting that it was a shared belief held by multiple individuals. If you read Deuteronomy chapter 19, especially verses 15 through 19, it's clear that one witness wouldn't have been enough to really persuade any other Jews of any claims really whatsoever. Even for a mundane claim like a civil lawsuit, you have to have several witnesses and they have to be interrogated separately. In fact, even just to reset the Jewish lunar calendar each month, the Sanhedrin required 2 different witnesses, and those witnesses still had to be interrogated separately. Now, this doesn't necessarily prove or disprove the resurrection narrative, but what I think it shows is an important insight, which is that the Jewish culture was, particularly at this time, very, very sensitive to the fact that witness testimony was not necessarily reliable. Now, we also have a number of very early creedal beliefs suggesting that there was indeed a community of believers. The most well-known is probably 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 through 5, which was probably an early pre-Pauline creed. Now, this is the point where we have the most unanimous, or at least consensus interpretation of accord among expert scholars, that this was something very early, probably, likely within the first year. Now, some scholars date this to between 1 to 3 years, but most scholars, I think, contend that this creed developed within the first year after the death of Jesus. Now, the rest of these creeds are other pre-Pauline creeds. So these are all creeds that developed before the era of Paul. Now, the ones that I've highlighted with asterisks are probably even earlier than that. And I don't mean earlier than pre-Pauline. I mean they were in the early pre-Pauline era, so probably within 1 to 3 years of the death of Jesus at least. So there were a lot of creeds. They all sort of point in the direction of there being a community of believers. So that's fact number 3. All right, fact number 4. The secondary attestations appear to aim at factual accuracy rather than mythic storytelling, suggesting that Jesus and his healings were understood as historical realities. Now, Google AI, Gemini AI gave this a score of 8 out of 10. So there is an immediate appeal to contemporary verification, and the miracles of Jesus are, presented in documents that were written in a way that seem to express a historical intent. Now, there are 3 qualitative differences that affect the sort of early Christian literature and differentiate it from other living traditions. So the first was the example of living witnesses. There's definitely appeal to living witnesses in a lot of these writings. The second is openness to verification. And the third is sort of an unusually or uniquely historical grounding. So let's go through these and look at examples for each. So first, there's this quote from Quadratus of Athens. Now, this is important because what he's advocating here is that there was a legacy of these healing individuals lasting roughly to his time. Now, Quadratus wrote this in roughly 120 CE. So he's saying that the people who were healed did indeed last to roughly the time of Quadratus of Athens. I think that's at least a very interesting fact. Papias of Hierapolis also puts this quote. I'll just leave the quote on the screen. And again, this is an appeal to living witnesses or living voices. Paul in the Corinthians Creed that we just discussed talked about most of the witnesses still being alive. And Luke similarly uses language that seems to indicate an appeal for living witnesses. All right, now the second trait that I advocated was the openness to verification. So here's a quote from Polycarp of Smyrna, and he's clearly basically soliciting, please verify this information. He's saying, people remember these things, and here he ends this passage by saying, I believe that you remember these things too. And what he says here is something that's often repeated, which is, nothing is hidden from you. Irenaeus makes a very similar statement talking about Polycarp sitting and conversing with John and the others who had seen the Lord. So that's through the language of Irenaeus that he gives in this statement right here. We also have language from Paul saying, again, these things were not done in secret. All right, now, again, there's also an unusually and uniquely appeal to historical grounding. So here's a quote from Justin Martyr in his first apology, where he actually appeals to the acts of Pontius Pilate, which were recorded. So he's saying here we have a record from this era that we have access to, which is the acts of Pontius Pilate. Now, this is clearly a very intentional historical grounding. Here's another quote from Justin Martyr from the dialogue with Trypho, appealing to the knowledge base of the interlocutor. We also have the fact that, this is very unique in comparison to other contemporary religious traditions, including paganism, mythologies, and mystery cults like Mithraism. And we can also contrast this with extant religious traditions, such as Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. The early Christian traditions, again, early in contrast to other religions, appeal to living witnesses for a lot of specific, recent, and publicly verifiable historical events as the foundation of the faith. Now, various historical scholars have underscored this as well. Larry Hurtado, who's also a secular scholar, says, there is a torrent of literary texts composed in the first 3 centuries. I think early Christianity was different, even odd or bizarre, in the Roman world for these practices. Here's a quote from Paula Fredrickson, also a secular scholar. The difference is that the story of the Gospels is attached to real historical persons. In the case of Dionysus, these are myths. They're not reports of events in time. The Gospels present themselves as reports of events in time. So again, this is a quote from Paula Fredrickson, who's a secular scholar. All right, here's my fact number 5. Many religious traditions include sects that acknowledge Jesus. And, we're talking about his depiction as a possible bodhisattva in Buddhism, as an avatar or yogi in Hinduism, and as a prophet in Islamic tradition. So this is exceedingly uncommon for any religious figure in history. So Google AI gives this one a score of 8 out of 10. The 14th Dalai Lama actually has stated on several occasions that he regards Jesus as a bodhisattva. Now, this is a major figure in Buddhism. So in his book, The Good Heart, A Buddhist Perspective on the Teachings of Jesus, which is a collection of his reflections on the Gospels, he implies this view, and he's quoted as saying, "For me, as a Buddhist, my attitude towards Jesus Christ is that he was either a fully enlightened being or a bodhisattva or a very, very high spiritual realization." He knows that, elsewhere in this book, he knows that Jesus' life is dedicated to the welfare of human beings, and that aligns with bodhisattva motivation and great compassion. Thich Nhat Hanh, and I'm probably mispronouncing that name, is a very strong figure in Buddhism. The living Christ is the Christ of love, who's always generating love, moment after moment. When the church manifests understanding, tolerance, and loving kindness, Jesus is there. I've adopted Jesus Christ as one of my spiritual ancestors. We also have quotes from Swami Vivekananda, and now this is from the school of Hinduism, the Hinduist religion. And this was a key individual, by the way, who brought yoga to the West. He considered Jesus to be an avatar, or a Sakti Vesha avatar, an empowered incarnation like Krishna or Buddha. He taught that Jesus was a manifestation of God who had attained oneness with the divine or the Brahman, and he had returned to earth to help others. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan is a prominent 20th century Hindu philosopher and the second president of India, and he also viewed Christ as a manifestation of God. Probably not unique or different from other Hindu deities, but certainly on that level. The founder of the Baha'i faith, who's Baha'u'llah, also says he calls Jesus the Son of Man, particularly in this quotation that I have on the screen right now. And he mentions that Jesus is a manifestation of God. Now, when we talk about Judaism, I normally mention the antagonistic contemporary Jewish beliefs that are written down in the Talmud or the Toledot Yeshu. But there are other works from avowed Orthodox Jews who explicitly believe in the resurrection. We have Pinchas Lapide, I believe that's the correct pronunciation, but I apologize if I'm butchering that name, who wrote in the resurrection of Jesus, the quote that you see on the screen. Now, again, this is an individual who is an Orthodox Jew, and he believed that Jesus did indeed resurrect, and that Jesus was, at least in some regard, a messenger of God. Now, I just want to point out again how exceedingly uncommon this is. You're not going to find it, Jews who talk about Muhammad this way. You're not going to find, Muslims who talk about the Buddha this way. It is exceedingly uncommon for religious figures to have this degree of veneration and sanctification in so many different religious traditions. I think, at the very least, you have to consider that's probably telling. Out of all the religions of the world, and out of all the figures from each religion, there seems to be this very uniquely high degree of accord around whether or not Jesus was divine. All right, middle fact number 5 is that we have antagonistic sources that endorse the theological narratives of Christianity. Now, that alone is very unusual. Christianity is, in fact, probably the only theological narrative with core, purely theological components of the narrative being acknowledged by antagonistic sources. So, the Christian theological narrative is really rather uniquely well documented by external antagonistic sources, which explicitly, endorse that there were things about Jesus' acts which were either extraordinary or, at the very least, not mundane. So people do attribute the power of Jesus to an extra-worldly power in a lot of different ways. If we look at the Jewish Talmud, if we look at the writings of Celsus, we know that there were people in the ancient world who viewed the powers of Jesus as genuine acts, at least, of sorcery and magic. Now, this has been echoed by Bart Ehrman. I'll put his quote on the screen, but Ehrman is, of course, a very atheist, or at least agnostic scholar. We also have Giza Vermes, who's a Jewish scholar who comments on this. We have John Dominic Crossan, who's, of course, a very atheistic scholar, who agrees that Jesus was seen as a healer and an exorcist. I'm putting these quotes on the screen right now as I'm talking about these individuals, but please feel free to freeze the frame and focus more on each of these quotes. We also have other verifications from other hostile sources acknowledging at least some aspects of Christian theology. And this is included in the sources that we've talked about, the Talmud, the Toledo Yeshu, Josephus comments on this, and then we have Jews being quoted in other sources like Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and we also have pagans who are quoted in some sources like Arnobius of Sica or Lactantius. So, across a lot of different religions, we almost never see very clear hostile verifications of some of the theological components. So this about Christianity is very unique, and Google Gemini gives this a score of 7 out of 10, but the reasons that Google had to dispute this is because essentially the best example that it had was the Baha'i faith, which is a rapidly growing religion, and the rapid growth of the Baha'i faith is one of the reasons that Google says, well, this is sort of acknowledged by antagonistic sources. That's explicitly acknowledged as one of the miracles of the Baha'i faith. All right, fact number 7. Jesus is actually the only figure explicitly named in canonical Jewish literature who is described as performing wondrous magical acts. And we're not specifically talking about miracles here. We're talking about apparent supernatural magical acts without divine authority. Google Gemini gives this a score of 8 out of 10. I found 3 passages that very clearly talk about Jesus as a magician. We have Sanhedrin 43a. Now, this is very well known, and I've talked about it in other videos, but it's on the screen right now. We also have Shabbat 104b, which explicitly acknowledges Jesus as a magician. We also have this very interesting passage from this source. I'll put the passage on the screen right now, but this is very interesting. So I would encourage you to freeze frame on this and read it very carefully. The reason why this is important is this talks about Jesus being able to perform healing miracles, although this was denied by a very well-respected rabbi. But this is interesting because these are not talking about healing miracles that are recorded in the Gospels. This is talking about a specific healing miracle offered to a specific rabbi. I think that's at the very least interesting because you can't argue that this is believable. This is not merely a response to gospel testimony. The reason why Google didn't give this a higher score is because there are other figures in the Jewish canon that are sort of briefly mentioned. We do have the Pharaoh sorcerers, but they don't meet the first criteria that I gave, which is they don't have individual names. So they're not named figures. We also have the Witch of Endor. Now, the Witch of Endor isn't really named. She isn't provided with a proper name, and she does seem to be conducting a seance. And there's also this sort of debate about what magical power she has access to, because there is some sort of, in the recounting, I won't go into too much detail, but in the recounting of the story around the Witch of Endor, she basically maybe has control of a spirit rather than being magical herself. All right, let's switch gears to minimal fact number 8. After the death of Jesus, Jewish liturgy and theological life underwent a really profound change, even among Jews who did not follow Jesus. Now, I've made a whole video about this, but when I first started looking into this as an atheist, performing an inquiry in a scholarly way into Second Temple Judaism, I was really expecting that the death of Jesus should not have been theologically impactful to those outside of his own circle. Instead, what we see is a lot of different effects after the death of Jesus that really profoundly affect Jewish Second Temple life. For instance, we know that after the death of Jesus, there does seem to be a redesigning of the central compartment of the Holy of Holies. Initially, there was a fabric or veil. This is the tearing of the veil. And we know from Josephus that this was replaced with golden doors. Now, we have to know that this could not have been a purely aesthetic choice. And the reason why is because details around the construction of the temple were very, very, very closely followed. The Jews were extremely scrupulous. These are some of the holiest details in Jewish canon. So these had to have been very scrupulously followed. They wouldn't have made a simple, choice like this for random or preferential or aesthetic reasons. We also have several narratives from Josephus and also other Jewish writers talking about different aspects, not only of the tearing of the veil, but also failures of the outer walls and the gates within or around the temple after the death of Jesus. And none of these accounts happened before the death of Jesus. This does sort of mirror the tearing of the veil, but it's independently theologically impactful. Again, Josephus tells about the doors of the temple, the gates opening spontaneously, even though it took 20 people to open these doors. I'll put the quote from Josephus on the screen right now, but the point of this quote is that this was seen to be a very ominous portent, and this sort of breaching of the gates, the opening of the gates spontaneously, only happened after the death of Jesus, and it seems to really parallel or mirror the tearing of the veil. Now, several other things happened around this time. There was a widespread belief after the death of Jesus that the Spirit of Now, I'm not saying because of the death of Jesus. I'm saying coincidentally, after the death of Jesus, there was a widespread belief that the Spirit of God had left the second temple after around the year 30 CE. God's presence was, no longer felt to be within the temple. It's, exceedingly unlikely that this was invented as a later tradition, and this is in fact mentioned by Josephus as well. So we know that this was not probably a later invention. Also, the miracles around the Yom Kippur atonement ritual all stopped happening all at once and all right after the death of Jesus. Now, this is endorsed by the Jerusalem and also the Babylonian Talmud. So this is part of Jewish canon. And Jewish tradition records that there were a lot of other unusual events beginning around the year 30 AD, such as the temple doors opening on their own. And these events were widely seen as a sign that God's presence had left the temple, and it's evidence that there was something that had changed in the year 30 that was theologically impactful to the Jewish people. And again, the death of Jesus should not have affected this. Now, some historians have indeed also commented on this being at least an unusual coincidence that is notable and difficult to reconcile. Now, here's another quote from Giza Vermes, who talks about that these phenomena did happen coincidentally after the death of Jesus in 30 CE, and they happened throughout the last 40 years of the Second Temple. But here's a quote from E.P. Sanders, also widely regarded as a secular scholar, who talked about the various portents of destruction that were later recalled. And he goes into more depth about the miracles around the atonement ritual in this quote, but again, I made a separate video about that. So please also see my separate video. I'll link it right now. Here's fact number 9. The rapid and enduring initial and subsequent spread of early Christianity, this is before Christianity was approved as the official religion of Rome, does remain difficult to explain through ordinary social or historical causes. Now, again, here's a quote from John Dominic Crossan, who is an atheist on the screen, who also endorses that after the death of Jesus, the movement should have been decimated. But in fact, after the death of Jesus, this marked one of the most successful periods of early Christian growth. Rodney Stark has done a lot of sociological work in describing and quantifying the growth of early Christianity, and he calls this an astonishing expansion of Christianity. Peter Brown also makes this point as well, saying the sheer scale of the change in the religious texture of the Roman Empire is bewilderingly huge. Now, here are the numbers of growth that Rodney Stark provides. And again, this is a very, very rapid degree of growth. And there isn't really any good explanation for this. Now, people will sometimes point to explanations like the common language of the Roman Empire, or the fact that there were roads. But if those kind of common factors are able to explain the spread of Christianity, then there should have been a period of growth in other religions. For instance, mystery cults should have persevered. A lot of the pagan traditions should have persevered. Judaism should have become a bigger and more prevalent religion. And in fact, there were some emperors who wanted to quell the Christian trend by helping out the Jews in different ways, and that's generally agreed upon. And nothing else seemed to work. So there isn't really a good explanation as to why Christianity had this effect, and other religions did not suffer the same, did not endure the same period of rapid growth. All right, here's the last fact that I'll provide. There's a bonus fact at the end, but here's the last fact. And I'm going to be brief on this, but the story of Jesus does contain several internal mysteries that resist easy explanation. So for instance, we have the fact that the followers of Jesus seem to become more emboldened after the death of Jesus, even though we know from Sanhedrin 43a that there would have been consequences for those followers. Sanhedrin 43a says that there were at least 5 other disciples of Jesus who were also executed. We also have a lot of other mysteries, though. We have the conversion of James the Just. We have the fact that there's evidence that the tomb was empty. I've made a separate video of this, which I'll link. We also have the fact that Peter did experience a vision that was probably transformative. We also know that Paul probably underwent a very profound theological encounter that really changed Paul's theological experience. Now, Google Gemini gives this a score of 8 out of 10, but the point here is, I know a lot of apologists have dealt with this argument, so I'll be pretty brief on it, but the point is, the narrative of the death of Jesus and the birth of Christianity is intertwined with many mysteries which are otherwise superficially difficult to solve. Here's one more bonus fact that Google gave an 8 out of 10. Now, this was a suggestion from one of my viewers, so I'm really grateful for this one. But here's a bonus fact. Jesus is the only person where we have initial enemies who later died as martyrs for the cause of Jesus. We have James the Just, and we have Paul / Saul of Tarsus. And we don't seem to have that in any other religious traditions at all. There are other people who died for other religious traditions, absolutely, but none of them, actually, that we know of, started off as enemies of those traditions explicitly. So that's another way that Jesus is unique. And again, Google gives this one an 8 out of 10. So these are just some things that I think a lot about. These are things that I've uncovered in my scholarly journal as I've sort of transitioned a little bit from atheism towards reluctant belief. But it's not just important to me what I think. What I really want to know about is, what do you think? What do you think of all these facts? Are these interesting to you? Do you find them intriguing? I find them at least to be compelling in the fact that there's a lot of evidence here that seems to point in a very concordant direction. So this evidence seems to be converging towards a conclusion. Now, I'm still following the evidence, and I'm still doing a lot of research. So again, I would love to know what you all think about this. Also, do you think there are any important facts, any important facets of early Christianity that I've missed? I'd really love to know about that as well. Again, I'm super grateful for you checking out this video. This has been a lot of work, so I would really appreciate if you get anything out of this video at all. Please like the video. Please click the subscribe button so you keep in touch with the channel. Please click the bell icon so you don't miss out on future videos. And above all, really comment on this video and tell me more about what you think about some of the evidence that I've brought up. And maybe the most important thing to me, as always, and as with all of my videos, is please have a really wonderful day.
Saint, or that, servant
Does religion poison everything? If you are like me and an atheist or going through a deconstruction process, you've probably read this. If you've not read it, I highly recommend it. God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, How Religion Poisons Everything. Let's talk about that one phrase. Does religion poison everything? And then I'll do another talk about the whole book. Let's just talk about that one piece, because that's a question that I get, and I've seen Christopher Hitchens, who's gone on. He's passed, unfortunately, but there's lots of interviews out there, and Chris Hitchens talks a lot about it. So I thought I would cover it on my channel. My name is Timmy Gibson. I'm a former fundamental evangelical Bible thumping and tongue talking Chandela level Holy Ghost rolling pastor. Did that for 30 years. 48 years I was an evangelical Christian, and 18 years I pastored my own church. Before that, I was associate pastor, youth pastor, student pastor, and so forth. So, does religion poison everything? It's almost like I kind of feel like I did before I called myself an atheist. I struggled to call myself an atheist, though technically I was an atheist before I even acknowledged it with that, accepting that, yeah, I guess I'm atheist, which, again, I always say this because I know there's first-time watchers here on my channel. An atheist simply means that I do not see enough evidence to convince me to continue to believe in God. And the Christians or the religious people are the ones that make the claim. Therefore, the burden of proof lies with the Christian, not the atheist. People say, you can't prove there is no God. What? Right? It's like, no, you're the one saying there's a God, so prove it. Then you can't. So, does religion poison everything? Gosh, I'll be honest. I wanted to think on it even more. I've been thinking about it actually for months and months and months. But I was thinking about it today, and I thought I should just do a video and just kind of go with my first thoughts on it. And my first hesitation on it's that word. I forget what's that called. Like everything, everyone. What's that? There's a name for that. You can cuss and discuss below. Let me know. It's skipped my mind. I know what it is, but it left me. Pejorative? No. Anyway, I don't like those words. Everybody says. Or every Christian thinks that, which is just not true, or every atheist thinks that. No, I mean, it's not true, right? There's always exceptions to the rule. And so let me answer it straight up, and then let's hem-haw around about it. You know what I mean? Does religion poison everything? Let me ask you this, because logically I think yes. But then when I kind of think about it, I'm like, well, not everything, right? But think about this for a second. Just for a second, think about this. If it's not true, which it's not, so work with me here. If it's not true, like the Bible, which is not true, treat it as though it is true is deception and lie. So, do lies poison everything? I guess even that would be debatable, right? Because, if you're married like me and my wife says, "You like my hair?" I do. I like it, right? I'm gonna, which I do like her hair. But I'm just saying, if she did it in some weird way that I didn't like or I didn't think looked good, I would hesitate to tell her that. Therefore, right, that would be quasi a lie. So really, like rationally, it makes sense why Christopher Hitchens would say that. Why he would say religion poisons everything, because it's not true. Right? So if it's not true, I mean, I believe it not to be true. I know Christians clearly believe it to be true about their religion, but they believe all the other religions aren't true. But then a Muslim believes that Islam is true, but they don't believe any other religion is true, and so on and so forth about all religions that we know about. And then throughout human history, there's been thousands of gods that used to be believed in, now aren't believed in. So, right? I mean, it's almost like someone gets kidnapped, but the kidnapper is nice and feeds the child, is sweet to the child. It's like none of that makes sense, right? It doesn't matter if they're kind to the child. They feed the child and treat the child. They give encouraging words to the child, because it's wrong off the get-go. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? It's like wrong from the go, because you kidnap this kid. right? It's like that. It's kind of like, it's just like that. In my mind, does religion poison everything? Yeah, because it's like the kidnapped kid thing. It's like, how could you call a kidnapper nice if it's, even though they're being nice technically, once the kid's kidnapped, but it's still wrong, right? That's so fucked up. And that's how I view the Christian faith. Clearly, within the Christian faith, and I would like to think I was one of these people. I was a good person. I was trying to pray and do the right thing and trying to help people. And like I was, like many of you probably are. Okay, like come on, many of you are you're good Christians, and you're just trying to follow God. You're just trying to do what you think God wants you to do and live like Jesus wants you to live. And you need to all those things, and that's good. That's a good thing to want to live right and be a good human, right? I mean, that right? And there's a lot of good humans out there that believe all kinds of crazy things, right? There's good Hindus out there right? But a Christian thinks the Hindu religion is false, and yet they would say the Hindu, regardless of all the good they're doing, doesn't matter because they haven't accepted Jesus. So they're going to hell. Do you see that logic? It's similar to my position as an atheist as it relates to, does religion poison everything? Well, yeah, it's not true. So, again, using the kidnapping analogy, it's like it doesn't matter how nice the kidnapper is to the person they kidnapped, because they're kidnapped. And it's the same again for those of you that are Christian. Of course you think your religion is the one. I mean, when I was a Christian, that's what I thought. I did. I thought all other religions were false or devilish or deceptive. They were something that the devil allowed or created to deceive people away from Christianity, from the one true right message, right? So again, you follow that line of reasoning, and then you almost are forced to say, well, yeah, religion does poison everything, because anything that religion touches, even though it might be the kidnapper being good to the victim, it's all based upon a falsity. It's not true. Is this tracking? Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? So that's my answer, and then but I want to hem-haw for a minute, but that's my answer. Yes, I do believe religion does poison everything for that reason, because again, just like the kidnapper being nice to the victim, it's all wrong anyway. So that kindness is null and void, because it's like they were kidnapped. So that is why I would say, just logically using my reason, I would say, yeah, 100%, that religion does poison everything, because it starts with a false premise. It's not true from the get-go. And so anything that would be said after that is poison. Similar to the kidnapper. It's like anything that the kidnapper does after the kidnapping is just wrong, right? It's so now let's hem-haw just for a little bit. Of course, there are churches doing good work. There are missionaries that are, of course, they're proselytizing. They're preaching, but they're feeding people, giving them clothes, but then preaching to them to get saved. So, that's shady, right? I think just help people. Period. Don't preach to them. Just help them. But anyway, I've been there. I've been on missions trips. like many missions trips and helped build orphanages, and I've helped help feed I've done a lot of that stuff when when I was pastoring the church, and we did mission trips in the church and all that kind of stuff, and I was we definitely did that kind of stuff. And so that's why I hesitate when I think, man, does religion poison everything? I mean, there are some good things that religion is attempting to do, but also just going back to Christopher Hitchens, he's like, what? And this was like a famous question that he started asking people, but like, what could you do as a Christian that I couldn't do as an atheist? I shortened it. It was a little bit longer than that. But essentially, that's what the question was. Basically, like, what good could you do as a Christian that I couldn't do as an atheist? Right? Atheists, and they do, can do all sorts of charitable things. And I know that the church is known for a lot of charity. I know that a lot of hospitals came out of the church and all that, and that's good. I mean, that's great. And yeah, I mean, that's all I can say is like, well, that's cool. Beautiful pieces of art were created by Christians. So that would have been the only, when I was first thinking about that question, does religion literally poison everything? That's where I would hesitate on that. Is of course individuals and groups, churches can come together and there's a coat drive going on at a church over here, and in fact we're going to donate a couple coats. I hope they'll take atheist coats. Right? Is that okay? This is an atheist coat. It was owned by an atheist. Do you guys still take those kind of coats at this church? Right. So, but Christians clearly, or religion in general, aren't the only good doers in the world. And in fact, just watch the news. There's a lot of evil that comes out of church too, right? I mean, there's scandals galore. Like there's so many charlatans out there preaching, and you just can watch video after video after video for days and days and hours of all the shenanigans that religious organizations have done. But it just wouldn't be fair if I didn't say, hey, there are religious organizations that haven't had scandal or don't have scandal. In other words, they're doing everything to be right. I mean, like all the stuff. Trying to, but that makes sense. Because usually there's a leader at the helm, and if that leader's a good person and wanting to make sure that they run their church with integrity and all of that. But still, at the end of the day, they're preaching something that's not actually true, right? Telling children that there's a hell, and that God will answer your prayer. I don't see how that can be a good thing to give people false hope, to think that if you pray, and of course the TV preachers tell you if you give money to them, that's how you can activate your faith for healing. Okay, that's horse shit. That's 100% false. That's not even like, well, that's debatable. No. You can't have different facts. Okay? Fact, you can't, it's like, well, your truth is that the world is round. My truth is the world's flat. No. You don't understand. When we know things, and that's what it is. And you can't have, you can be a moron and have your own opinion and say, no, the earth is flat. Like, okay, fine. I mean, you can be a moron. we live in a free country where if you want to be a moron, you can be. And so many are. Flat earthers are the biggest ones. That one is just, I understand believing in God way more than I understand people that believe the earth is flat. That is just absolutely insane. They're wrong. At the end of the day, that's not, well, maybe, no. They're wrong. The earth isn't flat. It's a sphere. Period. Full stop. That's why you don't see debates on college campuses with that kind of bullshit. Right? The reason you see debates on college campuses is on the existence of God. You don't see debates about the rapture. That's not true. You don't see debates on whether Noah the ark happened. Well, because it didn't. Right? And the rapture's never happening. So that's why there's no debates on that. Now you might get church debates within a church with Christian people debating on, is it pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib? And if you don't know what that is, look it up elsewhere. That's things that Christians debate about. And that's just complete ridiculousness, okay? So, yeah, religion, I am coming down on the side of, I think religion does poison everything, just like can a kidnapper do anything good to his victim by treating them nicely and feeding them and all that. Like it just doesn't work. So cuss and discuss below. As always, do the thing. Like, subscribe. It means a lot to me, the channel. It helps with the algorithm to spread this message far and wide. If you've stuck around till the end, I do want to mention I have a Facebook group for those who are atheist, agnostic, or going through the deconstruction process. It's called Timmy's Deconstruction Community. It's a Facebook group. You got to ask to join, answer a couple questions, and then we'll decide if we can let you in. Also, if you want to buy me a cup of coffee, you can do that through Patreon. If you want to commit to buy me one coffee per month, just $5 a month. It helps give me more time to do this, and hopefully some good stuff coming in the future. And a lot of you have asked about merch. The first thing I'm working on, I just can't come up with a design yet. I just haven't put my finger on what it is going to be, but I am going to do a coffee mug. That'll be my first thing, because I've always got my cup of coffee here with me when I'm talking to y'all. So I'll do that, and then we'll see what else. I love hoodies, so I'll probably do a coffee mug and a hoodie. Anyway, thank you. I really do appreciate you joining me today, and cussing and discussing down below. It's always fun reading the comments. Peace, everybody.
As I was traveling into the space of eternity, I was so pissed. I'm probably the only spirit to make it to heaven and actually be mad. I was like, what? I'm wrong? Because in my life, I was a devout atheist.
Hi, Betty. Thanks for joining me. I heard you had a near-death experience or a near-death type experience. Could you share with us, please?
Yes, I can. Thanks so much for having me. I'm totally stoked to be here. I grew up in a really chaotic, dysfunctional home. Every sort of trauma that you could imagine happened in my household. And so I turned to using illicit substances at a very young age to deal with all of the discomfort in my life. And my whole family is sort of like this perpetual cycle of addiction and poverty and trauma. I experienced a really traumatic loss in my life at a very young age. My parents, who were both very immersed in their addiction, made a decision to end their lives together. And I was 23 when that happened. My sister was 18. We found them. It was, I mean, there's just no words for what something like that is like. But in that moment, my addiction became my parent. And I decided that I would no longer be a victim to my circumstance. Now I would be the perpetrator in people's lives. And so that's what I did. I lived my life causing lots and lots of harm. And it progressed over the course of my life. I ended up having this near-death-like experience. I overdosed, and I was taken to the space of eternity in a non-physical realm, in blinding white light, enveloped in unconditional love, the same space that near-death experiencers describe. And I was guided into this space by loved ones I had crossed over. I had a boyfriend who had recently passed away. He was there to greet me. My father greeted me. And as I was traveling into the space of eternity, I was so pissed. I'm probably the only spirit to make it to heaven and actually be mad. I was like, what? I'm wrong? Because, in my life, I was a devout atheist. There had been so much dense energy that had happened to me in my life. There was no way that I was going to believe in a creator that would allow all those things to happen to me. And so I just stayed hidden from God, source, the universe, because it was just easier. And so when I made my way into this space, I was told that I was a divine spiritual warrior, that I had chosen to come to earth and to live this life, and that I had chosen all of the adversity that I had experienced. The first part of my life was like boot camp, and the second part of my life would be carrying out the mission, and that I had to come back to earth to do that. And I was like, oh, I'm not going back. Like being in that space of eternity was the first time that I ever felt whole. My whole life, all of these experiences had happened to me that just kept fracturing me into these little shards of glass. Like every piece of me was so broken. And when I entered the space of eternity, it was like this amazing glue that just made me into this beautiful mosaic. And I was finally whole and complete. And there was no way that I was returning. And I said, I'm going to grab my pajamas and a bowl of popcorn. I'll watch the show from up here. No way. You cannot make me go back. I will not go back. And they said, okay, let us take you through the details. Of your pre-birth plan. It'll probably help you get through the rest of your life because you're going back. So they took me, it looked a lot like a video game in my mind's eye, which could have a lot to do with the generation that I was born in. So this man presented himself to me. He was wearing a plaid blazer and a fedora, and we were inside of a grocery store, and we had an empty grocery cart, and he said, pick your life. On the walls of the grocery aisles, it looked like there were these cereal boxes, and every cereal box had a life experience on it. And I just remember like being this little orb of light, and I was like, well, if I'm going to Earth, I'm going to Earth. And I just start grabbing every cereal box I can get my figurative hands on. There's no body there, and I just start throwing everything into the cart. And, like just the densest experiences. And so many of them, my soul is like this, this script writer who has like no limits. Like, okay, we're going to experience all of these different things. And then there were also things in the cart that I hadn't gotten to in my life yet, like recovery and overcoming and being a teacher and spiritual awakening and just all of these things that seemed really positive and beautiful. And so after they showed me the scene, it was as if 2 tons of bondage had been released from my body. I was no longer a victim to my circumstance. I was actually a divine co-creator of my experience. Things had no longer happened to me, they had happened for me. Because on some soul level, I had chosen it for the evolvement of myself. I understood what was going on, and I thanked them for showing me like the very intricate part of my pre-life plan, and still absolutely refused to go back. And they said, listen, you have not balanced your life yet. You signed up for a mission and you have to complete it. So you don't have to go back into her, but you do have to go back. And so we'll show you the baby that you'll be born into if you choose not to go back into this life. And so they showed me this beautiful baby. They showed me everything about her, where she would be born, her ethnicity, her parents, her anniversary, what her purpose would be, her mission, all of the things that she'd have to go through in her life to get there. And because I hadn't balanced my own life yet, this baby was going to experience many of the things that I had already experienced. And I thought, oh man, there's no way that I can start from zero. If these are my only options, I guess I'll go back into her. And it wasn't like a punishment. It wasn't like we're making you go back. It was like, listen, you signed up for something, you have to complete it. And so these are your options for completion. There's no way to not complete what you signed up for. I kind of likened it to like being on a roller coaster. You can't hop off the ride halfway through. You got to just complete the ride. So I found my awareness sifting back into my body, and I remember very distinctly them saying, like, trust us. The second part of your life will not be nearly as challenging as the first. And I just said, I do not trust you. I sifted back into my awareness, and I just wrote my experience off as drug-induced psychosis. All that I knew was that I took a bunch of drugs, and then I thought I was talking to God, and I just thought, like, whoa, that was nuts. Like, I'll never be that messed up again. And that's it, And then the universe, source, my angels, guides, my higher powers stepped in this very loud, tangible way to let me know that my experience was a true one, and that I had to get onto a different path and begin to complete my soul's mission. So all of these divine synchronicities started to take place in my life. Like, all of my dealers that I had been dealing with for over a decade all simultaneously decided to change their lives and stop selling. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, I'd call up one guy, he'd be like, listen, I found Jesus, I want to be a good dad, like, I'm out of the game. And I'm like, okay, bye, click, call up the next guy, same story. But they did not know each other. It was bizarre. So now I had no way to get what I needed. And I had a physical dependency to certain substances. And so I found myself on day 3 of withdrawal. And I was so sick, and I was welcoming death. It felt like my bones were on fire, like my skin was made of broken glass. I was sweating, chills, sick, all over myself. And I had this thought, and I said, man, I couldn't eat myself if I wanted to, because I'm so sick right now that I can't even get out of this bed to figure out a way to do that. And right then I heard a voice, and it told me that I could request what I wanted fixed. And I was like in the throes of desperation. So I was like, okay, strange voice, I want to no longer be physically dependent on this substance. And so it told me to lay back, count backwards from 10, and I saw these 2 little men appear in my mind's eye. They were wearing white lab coats, and they had little lawnmowers in front of them. And they started walking through each crevice of my mind. And as they walked through the crevices of my mind, I felt these intense hot tingles. And I just knew that something magical, something mysterious was taking place. And after they finished walking through the map of my mind, I felt a plunger on the crown of my head. And then in this bright white flash, I was instantaneously healed out of day 3 of withdrawal. And I'm like, if you don't have any experience with what that's like, it's what they depict in films. I mean, like, it's brutal. It's tragic. It's why so many people stay tethered to substances for so long, because the pain is unbearable. So one moment before I'm writhing in pain, the next moment I'm completely healed and well. I jump out of bed. I'm crying out to the universe. I'm on my knees. I'm saying, I can't believe this is happening. How is this happening? I don't believe in this. Like, you could not have picked a more unworthy subject to bestow this kind of grace on. And so then, my path started to unfold, and it became clear to me what I was supposed to do. At first, I thought I was supposed to go out and share the news, and I thought that I could heal people with just my hands. And so I was like running around New York City, like laying hands on homeless people. I'm like, I can heal you. It was insane. I feel so bad for everyone that I encountered in that time. But after that, like when it started to sort of the dust started to settle a little bit, I found myself on a train. I had no destination, and this man appeared across from me. He was wearing a 12-step fellowship necklace, and I heard a voice, and it said, "That's your path. Follow him to a meeting." And that was on June 1st, 2019, which is about 2 months after my spiritual experience in heaven. And I started my path into recovery through some more divine signs and synchronicities. I found myself in a long-term rehab, completely against my will. I did not want to do this. I did not want transformation. I did not want to have to learn everything, like from the ground up. I had no idea how to do any part of life without using first. And in that long-term rehab, I ended up staying there for 17 months. I know, totally psychotic. I didn't have access to the internet or a cell phone for a year and a half. That's an accomplishment. So while I was there, I had this insatiable thirst for knowledge. And so I had to get all my information out of books. It felt totally archaic. I felt like a caveman. But I learned so much. I read every sacred text. I read everything I could get my hands on about metaphysics and the law of attraction. And I began to manifest my reality. They let me go to school while I was there. I have a job in the recovery field today. And my whole job is just self-disclosure. I say, hey, I'm in recovery. If I can do it, you can do it. And they pay me money for that. It's bizarre. And my whole life has really transformed in such a huge way. And I found my way to beautiful spiritual communities because I knew that was part of my mission, was to find my people. And so I just set intention and I asked the universe, I said, please send me my tribe. I know that they're here somewhere. And all of my communities manifest. I belong to 12-Step Fellowship. That's a spiritual program. I also study the Baha'i faith, which is a beautiful, sacred. I love their scriptures so much. It resonates so much for me. They believe in all manifestations of God. And I'm not a Baha'i. You don't have to be a Baha'i to get into the scripture. I also study A Course in Miracles, which is a metaphysical text channeled by Jesus. It's a reprogramming. And that's a big part of my life as well. I have a wonderful Course in Miracles community. And I belong to a group for near-death experiencers and spiritual experiencers on the IONS platform. And that's really changed my life. Going to our online sharing groups has given me so much language for my experience. And, I think the really big takeaway for me was that something is happening on a grand level. Like, I would not have been awoken otherwise. And the information that I was downloaded with in my experience was very loud and clear. We are in the midst of the Great Awakening. This is the most exciting time to be on Earth. We've all signed up to be here for Earth's ascension. We're here to transmute negative energy, to shift the collective consciousness from a level of third dimensional thinking to fifth dimensional thinking, which means from ego-centered thinking to God-centered thinking. And yeah, it's supposed to be a wild ride. And I'm really grateful that I was able to share my experience with you today. Thanks for staying so present for it.
Oh, thank you. You said in your experience, maybe I missed it, but you said you were there against your will in rehab. What do you mean?
I mean, like, it really, not against my will. I mean, well, sort of, it really felt like there was a hand pushing me through the door. Like, I did not want recovery. They were asking me to let go of the only life I had ever known and the only version of myself I had ever known. I didn't know what I was going to be like not using. And so it just really felt like so forced, but it just, it felt, like the universe was really pushing me in one direction and one direction only.
I was listening to a different interview that you did this morning, and you were talking about how they made you ask for help to open the refrigerator. Could you talk about that? Why did they make you ask for help?
So when I was in treatment, they had all of these intense rules. And one of the rules was you have to ask somebody who had been there longer to go into the fridge for you. And I was like, this rule is ridiculous. I'm a grown woman. I know how to use a refrigerator. But it wasn't about the fridge. It was about asking for help. This community helped me get into the practice of asking others to assist me on my journey with everything. And so because I have that practice in my life, I don't fear asking for help today. And not only asking other people for help, but also asking my higher power for help. I can ask Source for anything at any given moment because I've gotten into the practice of doing that.
I love that. It gives me the chills. What do you wish more people knew?
Oh, wow. I wish, I think everybody's on their own journey, so I don't want to wish things upon people, but I will say that your thoughts truly do shape your reality. My thoughts before were, I'm impoverished, I'm addicted, I have to do devious things to make money, I'm a liar, manipulator, thief, and so that was my reality. Today, my thoughts are different. I'm an abundant individual. I'm surrounded by spiritual community. I'm on a spiritual path. Good things come my way. And so that is now my reality, just by switching the thought around.
And what's the one thing that helped you the most, would you say, on your spiritual journey? Spiritual
Community is definitely the thing that helped me the most on my spiritual journey. And then some sacred texts that really stick out. A Course in Miracles has been just such a huge part of my life. At first, I thought that it was a handbook for the recently deceased. I was like, oh, it's very challenging to read. It reads like stereo instructions. You need a caseworker to help you get through it. And so that text really, really has changed my life in such a profound way. Letting me know that I live inside of a dream. This is an illusion. And that it can be a nightmare or it can be a happy dream. And that's all up to my thought forms.
How can people connect with you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. My handle on everything is Buddha Benny. And I'll put my email in the liner notes of this episode as well. I would love to connect, especially if you're dealing with something with addiction
The topic of the debate is what are the effects that come out of the Christian worldview. And you may not like it, but historians are pretty unanimous that the reason slavery is now been abandoned in the West is because of Christianity.
You know slavery is bad. You know that harm is bad. You won't find any of those principles. You won't connect the dots to any Christian teacher. Jesus never spoke out against slavery.
Who was the first person to call for the end of slavery? It was Gregory of Nyssa in the 4th century, and his reason was because of the Imago Dei. Humans were made above creation. We should not be treating our fellow brothers and sisters as if they are animals, because they were made in the image of God. Therefore, they should be on a level where we are all equal. So that was the first person to do it, and he did it because of what he was reading in the Bible.
This is part 3 of my response to Mike Jones in his debate with Dan Barker. Part 1 and 2 are linked in the description.
Hey everybody, tonight we're debating Christianity or secular humanism, which is better for society, and we are starting right now.
Christianity is divisive.
What's the data that shows that?
Well, look at history. Look at Catholics and Protestants killing each other, right?
Okay, what's the
Look
evidence
at the
Christianity caused
indiscriminate
that? What's the evidence Christianity caused that? Because I could just say, yeah, look, as secularism leads to death, look at the USSR. You wouldn't accept that, but why should I accept what you're saying? We've seen this throughout research in the past. As people thought like certain things, would lead to like this effect, and we find out that's not actually a thing. This happens in medicine all the time. We think like this nutritional aspect leads to like oral health, and then we find out, it was just a correlation, not a causation. So what you're saying here is correlative. Do you have any evidence of a positive association to suggest a causal link? What is the evidence that your side is actually going to be better for society? So far, Dan, at this point, you've given no evidence whatsoever, no studies, no data, no evidence that secularism is actually better. Let me finish. No better. I've given multiple studies. All you've done is you've said like, there's problems in Christianity. Okay, what is the actual reason that secularism is even better? You just can't be like, well, I don't like Christianity. I think it's divisive. Therefore, my side is better.
Mike Jones from Inspiring Philosophy recently debated Dan Barker on whether Christianity or secular humanism is better for society. This video is my response to Mike Jones's claims. I'm going to walk you through how he distorts research in order to make it fit the specific story, and how he sneaks in claims the sources do not actually support. This will be a series of videos because there is a lot to cover. I do not want it to be a pure takedown. I want it to be useful. So as we go, I will give you quick tips for spotting red flags when Christian apologists cite social science, history, or the Bible. In this first video and the next one, we will focus on research basics and how to read statistics with confidence. You do not need a college degree in social science to follow along. By the end of these 2 videos, you will know what questions to ask the next time someone waves a paper or book at you and says, see, this proves it. Stick around to the end because I am going to show you that one of Mike's own sources openly contradicts his position. Alright, let's jump in.
I will only be arguing that Christianity creates more optimal societies that can endure and generate progress.
Before touching any data, step 1 in the debate is to state your claim clearly. Mike does that here. Good. But listen to how broad it is. Christianity creates more optimal societies. It is a big claim that needs careful definitions, which brings us to tip 1. Always ask, what do you mean by ... Start with the word Christianity. What does Mike mean by that? All Christian traditions across history, including the ones that defended slavery and persecution of heretics and pagans? Or a narrower version he prefers? Does he mean Christians as people, or Christianity as an institution and set of doctrines? If he differentiates those, how? The debate title is not very nuanced, so some of this is not on Mike. Still, he could tell us which Christianity he's majoring. In other debates, he sometimes points to the Nicene Creed. That still leaves a wide range of beliefs and practices. You will see why this kind of fog helps him. It lets him slide towards a no true Scotsman fallacy when examples do not fit the story. Now look at the words he used: more optimal and progress. What counts as optimal? How do we measure progress? Life expectancy? Civil rights? Scientific output? GPT per capita, corruption levels, happiness. In this video, you will see a pattern in his choices. He highlights the metrics that fits the narrative and does not engage others that matter for a healthy society. You can catch this yourself by asking, what do you mean by that term, and how are you measuring it? Hello, my friends. This is Shane from Mindful Living. Welcome to the channel. I hold a master's in applied psychology and a master's in divinity, which helps when people bring social science into theological arguments. My goal is to slow things down, look at the evidence, and show you how to read it for yourself. Let's keep going.
Now, by Christian societies, I mean those that are based on Christian values. The majority of the population identify as Christian, regardless of governmental laws.
Okay, that sounds like a definition. A Christian society is majority Christian and built on Christian values. But that immediately raises a basic question. What counts as Christian values, and who decides? Take a few life examples. Some Christians hold an egalitarian view of marriage, while others insist on complementarian roles where women submit to men. Some oppose same-sex marriage, while others support legal recognition. Some push Christian nationalism, while others defend liberal democracy and separation of church and state. Which side is the Christian value? If it is automatically the side that aligns with secular humanism, what does that tell us? Also, keep in mind what Mike just said about head count. He says a Christian society is where most people identify as Christian, but you will see him tighten that definition later and shrink who actually counts as Christian. He also skips a key question. Are we talking about the flourishing of Christian societies only, which would make it acceptable to exploit non-Christian societies, or the flourishing of humanity as a whole?
Now, it's abundantly clear from multiple studies that Christianity has made the world a better place through missionary work.
This is where I have to stop and talk about history. The way missionary work gets celebrated in sweeping terms often erases what actually happened on the ground during colonial expansion. In the Americas, European arrival brought conquest and devastating disease. Estimates suggest that indigenous population fell from about 60 million in 1492 to about 6 million within about a century. That's a reduction of 90%. Whatever the exact breakdown between violence and epidemics, the result was catastrophic. Historians sometimes call it the Great Dying. Sure, indigenous nations fought one another at times, but they still built and sustained populations around 60 million across the Americas, taking a society from 60 million to 6 million, and only then teaching them kindness, forgiveness, and non-retaliation. Is that what we are calling optimal? So when someone says missionary activity clearly made the world better, we have to ask, better for whom, and by what metric? If optimal society means safer, healthier, and more flourishing for the people already living there, the record is embarrassing. If it means optimal for the colonizers, that is a different conversation, and we should be honest about it. Could Mike try to bracket the violence and say the good came later through schools and hospitals? Maybe, but you cannot celebrate the civilizing benefits and skip the cost paid by the people who were displaced, coerced, or eradicated. Intention does not erase impact. If a claim is that Christian societies are optimal, then the history of how those societies expanded matters. It is part of the ledger. Now, Mike might say the colonizers did not represent Christian values because they were not truly religious, and that the real Christians were the ones helping indigenous peoples. That move is the no true Scotsman fallacy, which brings us back to the question from the start. Who decides what counts as Christian values and what counts as a deviation? Disliking the brutality does not let you declare the brutal actors non-Christian. Yes, many missionaries objected to what settlers were doing. That does not mean the kind and altruistic ones are the only real Christians, while the rest somehow do not count. Remember Mike's own definition? A Christian society is one where most people identify as Christian. By that standard, the vast majority of settlers qualified. He cannot shrink the category only when it hurts his case. Some Christians say the world benefited from Western science and technology. Fair enough, but those benefits could have spread through trade, cultural exchange, and diplomacy without crushing native cultures. Think about how food culture travels. I live in Canada, and when my family goes out for dinner, I sometimes see white diners using chopsticks. Then I look over, and my kids are happily using forks. It feels a little surreal in a nice way. Our lives get richer when we share cultures, but I digress. Look at the residential schools in Canada and boarding schools in the US. They were designed to erase indigenous identity. Mike says freedom is a Christian value, yet he treats the forced remaking of indigenous cultures as acceptable because it brought education and tech. But does that really justify the coercion?
Without Christianity, the world would not be as educated and advanced as it is now.
Tip 2 for viewers. Correlation is not causation. People often see two things move together and then assume one caused the other. That is a mistake. If two trends line up, it might be coincidence. It might be a third factor driving both, or there might be a causal link that still needs proof. Until we have evidence for causation, we should not claim it. When most people in the West were Christian, it feels natural to give Christianity credit for Western progress. But we do not know what would have happened if secular humanism had been the majority view back then. History does not give us a controlled experiment. We cannot run the past twice to compare timelines. It is also true that during the colonial period, many non-Western, non-Christian regions had less advanced technology. That gap helped the West conquer them. But that does not show those societies were secular humanist and therefore slower. We had no modern secular states until very recently. So yes, you can say Christians played a role in Western development because Christians were the majority in those societies. What you cannot do is jump from that to a claim that Christianity is better than secular humanism. It's not at all clear that Christian values caused those advances. Other factors were at work: institutions, trade, geography, political competition, access to capital, and more. We will dig into this later. Quick definition before we go on. By secular humanism, I mean the view that humans should seek what benefits human society, not what pleases a deity. It values reason and critical thinking over faith. It grounds morality in what helps people flourish, not in divine commands. You can be religious and still be a secular humanist in practice. It simply means you do not make your daily decisions based on ancient texts or religious dogma. Do I think secular humanism is better than Christianity at building an optimal society? My short answer is yes, with a few caveats that I will explain later. For now, let's focus on why Mike's specific arguments do not establish his claim.
Secularists have not gone out and done this, and there is nothing in anything we could call secular doctrine that compels them to spread their worldview and educate people in the process.
That is a very unfair claim. Secular humanists do not need a creed to feel compelled before they help others. Plenty of people who hold secular values build schools, fund research, create vaccines, fight poverty, and improve public health. They just do not grab a megaphone and say, I'm doing this for secular humanism. Saying secularists have not got out and done this mistake quiet work for no work. Mike's framing also reveals something about his own standard. He treats indoctrination as a feature. Christian teaching in this view pushes you to spread the worldview while you help. Yes, some Christians give without the strings attached. I am not denying that. I am responding to Mike's specific claim that spreading the Christian worldview is a positive in itself.
Christianity has Christ commanding the Great Commission, which makes it our duty to make the world a better place.
Actually, the Great Commission is about making disciples, not about improving living standards or expanding education. Since Mike did not quote it, let's read it. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. Matthew 28, verses 19 to 20. Where does this say, go raise literacy rates, or go advance medicine, or go improve technology? It doesn't. The New Testament has many verses about preaching and converting. It does not have a program for scientific progress or public schooling. Christians can and do contribute to science and education. That is true. The question is whether the text itself commands or uniquely grounds that mission. It does not. I will dig into the history and theology of this in a later video. For today, we will stay focused on Mac's research claims and check whether the studies he cites actually supports his conclusions.
Numerous studies show religiosity is associated with more charitable giving to religious and secular organizations, whereas secularism is not. When compiling the data from multiple studies, this systematic review concluded. Our systematic literature review covering 77 studies reveals that religion, measured as group affiliation, and the importance of faith to believers, as well as religious service attendance, we keep out group and split organizations.
No longer say Christianity. He has to broaden it to religiosity. That is because the paper is about religiosity in general, not Christianity in particular. You can be religious in many things. The review does not single out Christianity uniquely, but outgroups or secular causes. Usually, pay attention to what the study measures. Mike's presentation lets viewers not noticing that the variables in the study are different from the claim he is making. He fires studies in quick succession, but the bridge from the measured variable to his conclusion is often missing. In this case, he treats religiosity as if it were the same thing as Christianity. He gives no reason for that leap, even if more detailed data showed that Christians on average give more to secular organizations. That still would not prove that distinctively Christian values are the cause. Teachings on giving vary across denominations and traditions. What counts as the Christian value when Christians themselves disagree? Take a live example. In some evangelical circles, people argue you should prioritize the in-group before helping outsiders. The U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has used that logic to justify tighter immigration, calling it a very Christian concept. Religious leaders pushed back, saying care for the foreigner and the marginalized sits at the core of Christian teaching. Which one represents the Christian value? Who decides? This is why definitions matter. If you can pick the slice of Christianity that fits your conclusion and ignore the rest, you can make almost any claim look supported by the data. Furthermore, the paper Mike cites is careful about its own limits. It says that while many studies find a positive link between religiosity and giving to secular or out-group causes, some studies find no link or even a negative one. Their abstract puts it like this. Despite the dominant positive relationship between religion and giving to out-group and secular organizations, there remains heterogeneity among the studies based on their location, how they define religion and secular giving, and the methods used. Translation and other factors are at play. On the surface, it can look like Christian faith is doing all the work, but something else that social scientists call confounding variables may be driving both the faith measure and the generosity measure. That is why correlation is not causation. Reality is more complex than a simple yes or no. So what exactly is a confounding variable? It is an unmeasured third factor that influences both the supposed cause and the supposed effect. Let me give you a classic example. As ice cream sales go up, sunburns go up. It will be silly to say ice cream causes sunburns. The truth is that hot weather increases both ice cream consumption and time in the sun. If you ignore temperature, you jump to the wrong conclusion. Apply that here. If you see a relationship between religiosity and giving to secular groups, it does not mean religiosity religiosity causes the giving. A third factor might boost both, which can also explain why some studies do not find the relationship. In their context, the third factor is missing or weaker. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this. Interpreting social science is trickier than Mike makes it look. When someone waves a paper to prove a point, start with two simple questions. First, is this correlation or causation? Second, does the study actually measure what you say it measures? Most sweeping claims fail on one of those. We will cover more questions later, but these two will already take you far.
Another study looked at 53 nations and found that frequent churchgoers are more active in volunteer work and that a devout national context has an additional positive effect. So when a nation is religiously Christian, volunteer work is increased across the board.
The paper is solid, but it does not show what Mike wants. Remember tip 3, check what the study actually measures. This one measures volunteering, which the authors define much more broadly than charity. They list 7 buckets. 1. Social welfare services for elderly, handicapped, or deprived people. 2. Religious or church organizations. 3. Education, arts, music, or cultural activities. 4. Labor unions. 5. Political parties or groups. 6. Conservation, environment, and animal rights groups. And 7. Professional associations. Now, think about the debate claim. Mike is arguing that Christianity produces more optimal societies. But in this dataset, you can volunteer for a political campaign, a professional guild, or a church choir, and it still counts as volunteering. Those are not automatically indicators of societal flourishing. Second, volunteering for religious organizations makes up about 46% of all volunteering in these studies.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Of course, my phone went off as soon as I started this video, but thank you so much, guys, for being a part of this video. I wanted to make a quick video just to talk about some quick life updates that have been going on, and how my spiritual life has been changing little by little. Actually, not little by little, significantly and quite rapidly. I was invited to this like Coptic retreat thing in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada, and I got to meet some amazing Coptic people there. I met people at a church in Guelph, Ontario, and I met another one in downtown Toronto, and I prayed Vespers with them. I prayed their liturgy. I, I met with their abunas, their fathers. I met with so many amazing people. And to be honest, I was in shock at their humility and who they are as individuals. And I'm still in shock. And I'm actually quite hesitant to make this video because looking at my own tradition, I feel less welcomed at the parish that I go to on almost every Sunday than the Coptic parishes I went to in Toronto. I walked into this parish, or whatever they call it in churches, and I felt like I was part of a family that I forgot about, or I didn't know existed. And I was welcomed, and a good example of this, I went into the liturgy, and my friends were singing in the front, and I go in, and I try to get to the pew, and I see this priest, this abuna, coming down with the incense, and he looks pretty intense. He's like walking in with the incense, and I'm kind of spooked. And I'm like, oh shoot, I gotta find a pew. So I go into the pew, and he comes over to me, and I'm like, man, he's gonna be mad at me. Because I'm not saying this to hurt anyone, all the experiences that I've had with Orthodoxy, now they all have been Eastern Orthodoxy at this point, up to this point, but all the experiences I've had with Orthodoxy have been quite negative, to be honest. So I thought this Abuna was going to come and be like, why are you late to liturgy? Like, why are you even here?